Hi, Sam. Welcome to the Actuarial Cafe. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. I actually have my metal cup as well with my coffee, so, you know.
Oh, I've got no drink.
How do you call it a cafe then if you don't have your coffee?
Oh
Come
my
on.
word. No, you know what? Full disclosure, I've already had 2 coffees, so I'm way
That
ahead
doesn't
of you,
count.
right?
That doesn't count. But
No,
yeah,
it
thanks
does
for hosting me.
count. It's always a pleasure.
I'm Sam Mawoyo. I'm an actuary at Axa XL in Bermuda. I focus on ILS, alternative capital, in the reinsurance space. So ILS and alternative capital is just this position where the capital markets and traditional reinsurance meet and transfer risk from one side to the other. So like I'm on that membrane in between these two places. Before this current role, I was at KPMG in Bermuda. That's where I kind of got introduced to the ILS world. And then before KPMG in Bermuda, I was part of African Actuarial Consultants. That's where I started my career in Zimbabwe. So, you know, we started off as part of the First Mutual Group, and then, you know, went as a standalone entity. And then I moved to the side. Yeah. But that's just a brief on my actuarial career. I've generally been focused on general insurance through the whole time, not by my own choosing. I think I was just fortunate. At the start of my career, I was placed in a general insurance department and I just really liked it and just ran with it. So, yeah.
As a general insurance lover myself, I am 150,000% jealous of you. Okay, so you've been in Bermuda since 2017, which is roughly 4 years. And before
Yeah.
you left, you said you were at AAC, where you worked about 4.5 years in Zim as well. So we
Yeah.
can safely say you've had the best and worst of both worlds, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I'm sure everyone's dying to know what the standout factor was that got you hired in Bermuda, coming from a role in Zim.
So it was pretty interesting because in terms of the way my interview with the guys in Bermuda went, one thing I did was that I did not try seem as if I knew it all. In fact, I was extremely humble. You know, I remember saying to the guys, and they were really, really nice guys as well, that, you know, I remember saying to them, listen, this has been my career in a less developed market than you guys are used to, but it's also meant that I've been exposed to things from a first principles level basis. And, you know, you guys are doing things at a different pace, but I'm willing to learn. So I put that out definitely on the first interview, that I'm not pretending to be what I'm not. I'm not, you know, I'm just willing to learn. And I think that that kind of was the one thing that got me in. Obviously, the other stuff behind the economics of the decision, I just don't know, because you never get told that stuff. But from my perspective, in terms of just as a strategy that I went into that conversation with, I went in acknowledging that I had spent 4 years in a market that was at a different stage in its development to what the guys in Bermuda had done, but I still brought the strengths from that market into the conversation. So like, yeah, like I say, just being able to do things from first principles, like, you know, building triangles in Excel rather than having a, you know, a fancy program that just does that for us, building basic capital models in Excel versus having, you know, full-blown simulation software that just does that for us. Like, yeah. And I just brought that into the conversation. So I think maybe they may have just liked the honesty. Yeah.
Wow, it's actually not a lot of people that are able to say something like that about themselves.
Yeah.
I think it's not easy to go into a place saying you don't know as much, especially when you're supposed to be an actuarial student or an actuary in training, and people have this view that you kind of know everything and you've kind of ingrained it in yourself as well that you know everything. But to be honest,
Yeah.
you don't. That's good.
Exactly. I think it's that humility that you need, right? To, especially at the start of your career, like no one expects you to know everything. You need a certain degree of humility to trust the process and trust those who are further in the process ahead of you and people who've had more experience. And it's kind of in the core of our training as well, like that acting with integrity. So integrity is stating exactly where you are. If you're good at something and you've got experience about it, yeah, by all means, tell the world. But if you're not there yet, put your hands up and say, I'm still learning this, right? So yeah.
You go, Sam. Okay, so you've gone from being in consulting to a consulting role in Bermuda, then you
Yeah.
changed from consulting into the industry. Tell us a
Yeah.
bit more about what that's been like.
It's pretty interesting. So consulting in Zim was slightly different because we had a very small team and the industry was, it's still at a different stage in its development. You know, there's a strong correlation between the state of the industry and the size of the economy. Our economy is still comparatively small, so our range of general insurance products are very simple. And then by extension, you know, you've got the economic issues that happened and whatever. So that led to a big brain drain from Zim. So the role of a consultant in Zim is a bit different. Like I always think about, like, I think my first or second day at AAC, you know, I was having to help do training for one of our clients, just explaining to them the processes behind actuarial reserves and actuarial subjects and actuarial topics. And then I think within a week or two after that, I was in a meeting where we're presenting results to an MD. Normally that doesn't happen. Someone who's a trainee with 3 days, 4 days experience doesn't meet an MD,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So that was that. Like there was a lot of exposure to very high offices at a very early age because the teams were very small and there wasn't that much of a pipeline between you and the very top. So that was very interesting. It definitely wasn't as technical as this side because, like I said, the industry is still small. So we have a few really dominant products, but even then we have a very stable risk environment. You know, we don't have hurricanes, we don't have earthquakes. Our worst case scenarios are just accidents here and there. And yeah, like it's not as bad as if you're trying to look at reserves for an earthquake prone area. So yeah, so that was pretty interesting. It definitely helped a lot more on the soft skills because most of our audience weren't really actuaries. Like you're trying to just take something that's comparatively complicated and explain it to someone who's not an actuary and just get them to understand that. Then so that was pretty much, I think, the majority of my experience in Zim, and obviously doing things at a first principles level. So when I joined AAC, we didn't have a general insurance department. We literally had, it was the three of us, Donald, Hove, Tafadzwa Chiduza, and myself, with David Moreira as actually just giving us oversight. But in terms of, you know, being in the weeds and clearing out stuff, it was us three. And we're having to build this department just by using a bunch of notes. So we didn't have a reference point in the way of like previous models. We just had the ST7 notes and we're flipping pages and, you know, you read a formula and then codes it up in Excel, go and ask for data, which is probably in the wrong format. So we had to really learn things from scratch, understand that data is not always as great as you wanted and, you know, all that stuff that comes with it. So that was pretty interesting. Then when I went to KPMG from AAC, the technical level of everyone around me was just on a different level. This was just, everyone was super technical. You know, sometimes in Zim, you could get away with just saying one or two big words and then people would get off your back. You know? But then in Bermuda, it was different. You know, if I'm going and presenting my results, even to someone who's you know, from a different field, like let's just say an accountant, if I go and say, hey, you know, we selected faster development factors, he'll ask, why did you select them? You know, what's your support? Why are you doing this and why are you doing that? So the level of technical expertise was different. And that kind of forced me to go back and re-examine my technical level. And then we had a bit more in the way of experienced actuaries around us, like in terms of general insurance experienced actuaries. So whilst in Zim, we had Mureriwa, who had a life insurance and a pensions background. This time we had guys who were, you know, through and through general insurance actuaries. Like my first boss when I got here, his name is Bill Miller. This guy he's been a general insurance actuary for the best part of, you know, 30 years. So so he knows everything that you can, you know, he's a really sharp guy in his field. So that level of technical expertise was just a whole lot different. There was a bit less pressure to be focused on very high up people. Like, probably in my second or third year, that's when I started seeing people who are in relatively executive positions or having meetings where I'm actually, contributing to them. But then in the first year, it was still get used to the models, get used to the technical bits, and then, you proceed there. So I think that was the major difference. Then in terms of speeds, they were equally fast. Consulting is very seasonal. In Zim, our busy season was sort of from January until sort of April. In Bermuda as well, it's a similar timeline. So in terms of just the pace of things, it's equally fast. And then from consulting into industry, that's been a very interesting one as well. So similar to my KPMG experience, where I had so many technical people around me, it's the same thing at my current company. I've got so many moments where I kind of think to myself that this guy is super intelligent, whether it's my direct boss or someone that I just interact with, they're like super, super knowledgeable, super intelligent, and they're just on a different pace of just doing things and understanding things. But I think the one thing that stands out across all three places is the difference in institutional memory. So like I said, in Zim, we had to start this department from scratch. We had to write reports, make observations, and keep going with that. And then, the team kind of moved on because the market hasn't got the capacity to hold on to so many actuaries. Whereas in my current role, or in my current company, you've got people who've been with the company for 20 years, 30 years. So that builds a certain amount of institutional memory that kind of makes a massive difference in terms of how things perform. People who will tell you that, in 2005, we built this tool, or we built that platform, or in 2010, we made this decision, in 2015, we did this and we did that. And I think that's been the biggest difference that I've noticed as well, in addition to all the technical stuff that I mentioned.
Yeah, and I'm sure that contributes even to knowing exceptional events by head and not having to Google why the data looks the way it looks.
Exactly. So it's that strength of just understanding why things are. So it's hard to describe, but you know it and you understand it when you see it. That institutional memory, that's what makes the institutions very, very strong and resilient. And they've been through everything. They'll tell you an experience from a particular hurricane. They'll tell you an experience from the global financial crisis. Right now, there's an experience from COVID. How did the market respond to COVID? So whenever we've got different situations coming up in the future, there's probably at least, 20, 30 really senior experienced people who've experienced something in the past. It's just that strength, I think, and that's probably been the one thing that's stood out for me.
Okay, so this is just a side note. Were you starstruck when you met these 30-year experienced general insurance actuaries? Because to me, that would be like meeting the Beyonce of general insurance.
I think personally, I was. I've been lucky not to get very starstruck in things. Like I have moments, like I have slight moments where I'll appreciate that someone's very intelligent, right? Like, the guys I currently work with, they're extremely intelligent guys. The guys at KPMG were extremely intelligent. Even at AAC, guys like Donald Ove, they were very intelligent. So I've always had those moments through and through where I'm like, gosh, I'm like really lucky to be working with these guys, right? Like, because they're just really sharp. So so I think I've been fortunate to not get too starstruck.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So in terms of training, what would you say has been the biggest difference?
In terms of training, I think at AAC and in Zim, there was a bigger reliance on the Institute of Actuaries training system, which was just the exams. And, once you're done with the exams, hey, well done, and life goes on. And I think that's just a function of the budget that's there. And like I said, the brain drain and the conveyor belt of talent. So some of these things, there wasn't enough time spent thinking about how to build the next actuary. Despite obviously everyone had their best intentions and were trying to do their best and stuff. But I think it was just a different budget and a different focus and a different market. And actuaries being very niche, no one really understood us as well as out here. Then after I joined KPMG, there was definitely a concerted effort to build you up as a professional beyond just being good at knowing whatever triangle or knowing whatever copula in, in capital modeling. There was a bit more of, communicating with confidence, managing meetings, delegating tasks. There was a lot more around let's build you as a professional. And maybe that's because of their global network. As a Big Four firm, they have people who are just dedicated to think about how do we train our individuals. So I think that was the biggest thing that I noticed. And then from KPMG to AXA, I think it was it's on the same level as at KPMG, where you have access to just these high power executives and all these guys who can come in and give you real-time feedback and will say, oh, Prey, you need to improve on such and such a skill. We've got budget towards you going and sorting it out, or we expect you to develop this. And so I think that was the one thing that I noticed, the difference in budget between what we have in Zim. In Zim, the budget for actuarial training is towards exams exclusively, and then outside GEA there's an exams budget, and then there's every other skills budget. Plus, I think in terms of just the feedback loop as well, it was much more open. That's the one thing that I realized. But I think it goes both ways, because you need a certain amount of humility for you to accept feedback. So, this side, there's a huge element of being upfront about it, not disrespectful, but being upfront. So, hey, you're trying to do this task. You did it XYZ way, but I think it would have been better if you did it EFG, and you actually have a robust discussion around that. Sometimes I think maybe our politeness from the Zim side kind of, so like the message is kind of layered. If someone is trying to tell you something, you're kind of having to dig out what exactly the point is, whereas this side, there's a bit more directness and there's a bit more trust between people. So if my current boss or my previous boss gave me feedback, I know that it's in the interests of the company and it's in my interests. So there's a complete trust to it. There's no sense of, oh, maybe he's just saying it to just put me down or just make me feel bad.
Okay. So a move like the one you made must have come with some kind of culture shock. And I'm interested in knowing how you navigated something like that, like having to change your social circles and having to interact in a new way that you didn't before, I guess.
Yeah, so I was a bit lucky in the sense that in my high school, I moved to England and stayed in England before, and then did part of, started off university that side, and then dropped out of university and all that stuff, and then came back to Zim. So I kind of had a sense of just multiculturalism. And then in Zim, I'd gone to very different schools. I'm a Kutama guy, I'm a Gateway person, I'm a St. George's guy. So, I've been to very different social circles. So I think I was relatively comfortable in different social settings. And then the team that I joined this side was headed by an American guy, and the guy I was directly reporting to was British. And then the team has, had Indian guys from,
wow.
Yeah, so it's a very multicultural team. So I think that helped as well in terms of bedding in, because I had prior experience in very multicultural or multi-background systems, but at the same time, no one was too dominant. And then Bermuda is also like a really open place, because there's quite a lot of foreigners and expats that are here. So it just makes it much easier for you to just bed in and just find your space in terms of what you like, what you don't like, and but yeah, I think that probably made it a bit easier in terms of the transition. Obviously, like being on the other side of the world from home, it makes a difference. Like it's the shortest flight I can get to Zim is 25 hours long on average. It's like 32 hours, or so exactly. So it's I remember like the flight from SA to New York on my first flight. SA to New York was a 16-hour flight, and it was in the evening. So it was like 16 hours of just darkness. That's how I felt, like this is going to be very far, and then you try look for the country that you're going to on an island, on a world map. You can't see it. You have to zoom in onto the ocean, and then boom, this is where you're going, So Yeah, so there was a bit of I wouldn't say it was a culture shock. It's a slight difference. Obviously, like leaving family and leaving friends and having to start again from somewhere else is a frustration. But, that's what life is, right? Sometimes you have to sacrifice things.
True. I totally get you. So since I've known you, and that was, when did we first meet? 2016, I think? When we were hanging out with Mercy.
Yeah. I think I bumped into you guys at
Pomona.
Pomona food court. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So since I've known you, you've been a volunteer for the profession in general, but more importantly for the ASZ. What does that mean to you exactly? Why do you put it in the forefront so much?
Because my career has been supported by other people more than myself. Like I'm always happy to give back to people, to just let them get a chance. So it's one of my favorite guys called Kelvin Chamnorwa. He always says to me, he helped me quite a lot, like in terms of just building up my CV, preparing me to leave Zim, all that stuff. And he always says, just pay it forward. Like literally every milestone I have, I always think about him and I'm like, hey, thanks for that advice. Thanks for marking my CA1. But it's not just him. There's other guys who've helped me. You go to like Douglas Hoto was incredibly helpful to me. Clement Chinaka was helpful. Tava Madzinga was helpful. Kelvin was incredibly helpful, Donald Ove. So there's a lot of guys who've just been extremely helpful for me. And my sense is that it's like you're taking from something, so you have to give back something from whatever that ether is. So volunteering for me is kind of my way of giving back and just hoping that someone somewhere out there is also going to benefit from it. Plus, in addition to that, I think another thing that's often not understood or appreciated from a volunteering perspective is that it sometimes builds other skills that you can't build at work. So for example, if I look at my AAC experience, like I say, the training was more technical and was focused in a certain way. But then I joined AAZ and I think I was elected to council in 2015 or thereabouts. And then that just exposed me to a different audience as well, where I had to develop other skills. So for example, my interactions with the regulator, like I'd previously never interacted with the regulator. And then when you're in industry, you have a perspective like, these guys, they don't know what they're doing. They should do things this way, that way, that way. And then, when you actually sit down with them and you understand how they see the world, it builds you up in a different way from a very professional perspective. So when you then finally start seeing things happen in a certain way in the market, you understand where they're coming from. So it's also a form of professional development as well. Just that volunteering and just seeing people who are just different from a different background and just understanding them. Yeah, so it's two parts: giving back to the system in order to build it and help it inspire other people, and at the same time build yourself as a person and as a professional as well.
And just to add to that, building yourself as a professional, I see most of the people that you're naming are really big in industry. You're not saying you met Benekai and then you met and then but then the names you're dropping, I'm sure some of that came from your volunteering. That's how you got exposed to that type of person, because they're not someone that you meet when you go write exams at a center, for example. They're not someone you meet on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly. And what happens is that when you put yourself out to volunteer, you start bumping into certain people. So for example, another guy that I forgot to mention was the former president, was Shepard Funkura, so former ASZ president. Now we're in different companies in very different roles. This is someone I would ordinarily never meet, right? But then I get into an ASZ discussion or a meeting that is, you can feel there's a bit of an inconvenience because it's on the wrong side of town. You have to get in your car, fuel up, go there, and all the stuff to prepare, and you're going to be taking notes. But after the conversation, he's the guy who just pulls you to the side and says, what exam are you writing? And it's like, oh, I'm trying to write XYZ. Oh, but then the trick with that exam is you need to prepare it this way, that way, that way, and boom, that's the difference between failing an exam by 1 mark and passing it by 4 marks. So you get those little things. And I think with these individuals, what they do is that sometimes they are also yearning to give back, but then they don't have that many opportunities. So when you bump into each other at certain places, they're more than eager to help.
True.
But the other thing that happens with sometimes some of these interactions, that you also have to be proactive, right? So you don't really want to be asking a question that you can easily Google, like, oh, how many exams do I need to pass for me to become an actuary? Well, Google is there, but there's, yeah. So it goes both ways. But I think a lot of people, they want to give back, but they want to make it very easy for themselves to give back as well. Even the very senior guys, because at some point they were at the same level as we are, right? Like they started off with the first exam. They started off on their first day at work, trying to kind of just make inroads here and there. And then over time, they just build themselves up. So yeah.
Wow, this has been way better than I expected. So what kind of advice, what additional advice would you give to someone who's looking to make the same move as you?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because I've had so many moves that are very interesting. Like, for example, I dropped out of university after first year. I wouldn't recommend someone to drop out of university, but I think I would say that if, in terms of just overall career and stuff, I think I would say that you just have to be brave sometimes. Just don't be afraid to go into areas that are uncharted. Like like I said, I got into the first or second general insurance department in Zim post dollarization. So people were doing stuff, but from 2009 to 2012, there wasn't that much going on in general insurance for actuaries. Now, normally I could have just panicked and said, you know what, guys, I want to go into a safe zone. There's pensions, actuaries. That's what we're used to. Let me go back into pensions. But I went into uncharted territory. You fast forward, we relaunched the AZ. I think that was in 2013. Again, that was uncharted territory. There wasn't any reference point on how to do this thing. Running for council, uncharted territory, because someone can turn around and say, well, you're too young. How can you be trying to run for council when you're only 24, right? But again, it's just uncharted territory. You just don't know where that's going to land. Coming over to Bermuda, like, I was gaining certain traction when I was in Zim. So it was a case of, hey, I found my nice sweet spot. I'm progressing well in my company, and people like me. My clients really like me, and yeah, but it's a brave decision to just up and leave, grab your suitcase, and you're going into the middle of the ocean. So I think there's an element of bravery that's just needed, and there's no harm in that. And then the other thing is that you also don't want to learn lessons that other people that you have access to have already learned. So that talks to the idea of mentorship, right? If someone had to go through 3 years to learn a lesson, and they're willing to give you that lesson in a 30-minute conversation over coffee, hey, pay for that coffee. They're just saving you 3 years, right? And listen, because these guys have gone through, the process. So I think that bravery and the humility to listen is probably the center of all decision making. So whether it's trying to make a move to Bermuda, or you're trying to make a move there, or you're trying to change companies, there's no harm in just being brave, but being sensible. So you sit down with the guys with the experience and say, hey, listen, I'm now about to make a move from AAC to a KPMG, or from a KPMG to an Axa. What do you think? And then be prepared to just hear things you don't want to hear. Sometimes they could just tell you that that's a bad move, don't do it, or that's a good move. I had other opportunities to leave Zim before I did that I was recommended not to, but that wasn't what I was trying to hear. I was trying to go there for a stamp of approval, like, hey, I want to do this move. And then, but then I got there and they're like, nah, don't make that move. And I'm like, but, why would you say that? And then in retrospect, you're like, whoa, that actually saved me 5-6 years, because I'd have gone there, realized that it's not so great a place, and then have to leave. And, And likewise, even in
Yeah.
Bermuda, I had similar situations where, I had opportunities to leave KPMG, but I had a network of people that I'd go and bounce these ideas to. And then they'll tell me, nah, just hold on, you're onto something really good. And then eventually when this opportunity came, they were like, that's the opportunity that we've been telling you to wait for. Take it, it's that sort of humility to go and be told what you don't want to hear and be
Yeah.
able to accept it and trust the process.
Yeah, my friend used to call it standing on the shoulders of giants. Is that it?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's exactly the thing, right? Like if someone took 5 years to learn a lesson, why should you have to take 5 years if
The
that
same
person is
5 years,
accessible?
yeah.
Yeah, like just go to them, sit down, be humble, and let them tell you what they think. And then, and that actually comes back to the point about training, the question about training that you asked earlier, where, that difference in training. And this side of the world, you tend to have access to people with a ton load of experience. So they've had so many lessons in that time period, which they're willing to impart on you in just a few seconds. So for example, like I really struggled with my final exam, and like that really was a massive struggle. I think it was now a mental problem and whatever. So all the other 14 I raced past them perfect, and then the last one, just session after session, I was just failing to get through it. And then after the session before I finally passed it, I had a conversation with my current boss and his colleague who's at a different branch based in London. And we're just talking about how I just failed this thing, and they were saying, well, one of the things they used to do was that they used to build a template that they would write down how many hours they've spent. So you know how the Institute of Actuaries will tell you that there's a 200-hour exam or 400 hours. So they would actually document that and journal it and say, on the 5th of August, I spent 4 hours. On this date, I spent 6 hours. And they'll add them up, targeting the 200 hours. And they'll, and this is something I never used to do. I used to just open notes and just read them and then go and sit on an exam. Now it worked for the 14, not the 15th one. So that humility to listen to more experienced guys and say, oh, is that what you used to do? Let me try that. And then I took that advice and went and implemented it. And it's like, oh, it works, and then, yeah. So there's a huge element that's required. There's a huge element of humility that's required when you're talking to some of these guys with so much more experience. And yeah, I think that's probably the one thing that I would advise a lot of.
Thanks so much, Sam. This has been awesome. And I'm sure this was weird for you, being the first person to be invited to speak on this platform. It was like, you're the first person, no pressure. Although there is pressure.
Yeah, like I guess the good thing is that the only way is up for you guys, right? So you've gotten the worst guy out of the way, and then everyone else is going to be better than him.
You think? What if you set the bar so high?
Nah. I think that there's very interesting characters out there, way more interesting people than yeah. But no, thanks a lot for the opportunity. It's always great to just get a chance to just tell your story.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Cheers.
All right, thanks.